Welcome back everyone to Cornerstone Cosplay. My name is Chris, and today we're going over part 2 of Hiccup's helmet build. We're going to cover doing our foam mock-up as well as getting into a little bit of the leathercraft aspects. So, let's get started. So, first things first, we are going to trace out the patterns we made last week onto some foam pieces. Here, I'm using 1/8 inch thick craft foam from Michaels. Basically, any EVA foam or floor mats or other type of foam that you would have that's similar will work just as well. I always try to use a similarly thick piece of mock-up material to help me see any potential pitfalls I may run into using my actual material being leather. Here I am modifying my pattern to have a groove that's designed for our overlap. I will use this opportunity to test that plan as well. Once you finish tracing your edges, you'll want to cut halfway through the foam from the top. But be careful not to cut all the way through. Then, carefully from the edge, you want to thin the foam out to half of its original thickness. Once this is finished, you'll want to glue your pieces together. You'll want to use a type of contact cement because it's both strong and flexible. Here I'm using Barge. It is a pretty big industry standard and very popular among a lot of cosplayers and replica enthusiasts. It's definitely not your only option, but it is my favorite. Here I touched up a seam with some cyanoacrylate glue just to fill in some of the seams. I used a setting spray to set it instantly, but you can do the same thing by sprinkling baking soda over it if you're in a time crunch. Once all the pieces are glued and dry, I test fit the helmet. I then trimmed and re-glued the template to fit. Once I was sure the template fit, I recut the mock-up down to recreate my now corrected pattern pieces. Now it's time to move to the leather. I trace my patterns on the front side of the leather, and that's called the grain side. That's basically where the fur used to be. Here I'm using some pre-dyed vegetable tanned leather that's 8 to 9 ounces. That's often a measurement that they use for leather, which means it's roughly about 1/8 of an inch thick. I generally use a box cutter or a trim knife to cut my pieces. It's always better to score the leather and cut through little by little rather than to try to do it all in one pass. I've found that makes it less likely that I'll slip while I'm cutting. Next comes a stitching groover. This one is a pro-style groover with the guide as the arm and the cutting piece in the center. It gives you a little bit more direct pressure when you're cutting with it. I do prefer this style myself. Once you set your distance from your edge on the guide, you can drag the tool along the edge. This will cut a thin, small groove suitable for stitching in, or in our case, to give us a groove to follow with the next tool. Now comes what many feel is a bit scarier tool, called a V-gouge, or in this case I'm using a U-gouge. They essentially do the same thing. One just has a little bit sharper of a cut, the other one's a bit more gradual. Now you can twist the handle against the head of the tool to control how deep the cut goes, but I tend to err on the side of caution. Here, we want to cut about halfway into the leather. Once we have done this, I use a box cutter and a tool called a French edge skiver to cut out the strip along the edge. That just helps to cut everything nice and flat as we're going. To help give strength to the two pieces that no longer have a grain side, I am cutting strips of thinner, softer leather to glue to the inside. This will make the stitching seams we'll be making later much stronger. For softer materials, I like to use a rotary cutter. This prevents puckering that can prevent your cut lines from being clean, straight, and more even. Now, we just glue them and let them dry. All right, everybody, thanks for checking out my helmet build part 2. Please tune in next week for some more leathercraft. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, drop a comment down below. And if you'd like, please hit subscribe and hit that notification button. It definitely helps us out on the channel. Thanks again. See you next week.